Her husband put the last of her 3 suitcases on the sidewalk at 11:38 p.m. and closed the front door without looking at her. The rain had started at 11 o'clock, the kind of rain that came down straight rather than slanted, the kind that made the streetlight at the corner of Beatty's Ford Road and Oakdale look like it was underwater. She was standing on the small concrete step in front of the house they had lived in for 4 years and 8 months, and she was 32 weeks pregnant, and she was wearing a pair of thin, flat sandals because her feet had swollen too much in the last week for the shoes she owned. She heard the lock turn from the inside. She heard the deadbolt. She heard the porch light click off above her head. She did not knock on the door. She stood there for about 90 seconds without moving. Her right hand was resting on the top curve of her belly, the way it had been resting for the last 4 months. And her left hand was holding the strap of a small black handbag that contained her wallet, her phone at 6% battery, a folded letter from her doctor at Presbyterian Hospital dated 3 days ago, and the key to a house whose locks she now understood had been changed while she was at her prenatal appointment. She stepped down onto the sidewalk. She took the handle of the largest suitcase in her right hand. She could not carry all 3. She did not know who lived behind the door of the small brick house at the end of Oakdale, where the streetlight bent slightly forward. She did not know that the woman who lived there had been awake since 10 minutes past 10, and would still be awake when the knock came at 12:07 a.m. Her name was Blessing Adeze Akebe. She was 29 years and 2 months old, and she weighed 138 pounds because she was carrying a baby the doctor had told her 3 days ago was measuring at exactly the weight it should be measuring at 32 weeks. She had gained 26 pounds during the pregnancy. Before the pregnancy, she had weighed 112, and she had been a secondary school English teacher at a small charter school off South Boulevard for 6 years. And she had married Gerald Nwosu Okoro in Charlotte, North Carolina, on the 3rd Saturday of June, 2021, at a small ceremony at the Presbyterian Church that her mother had flown in from Enugu to attend. She wore a dark gray maternity dress made of soft cotton that she had bought from a thrift store on South Boulevard for $11 in her 5th month. The dress was clean. She had washed it 2 nights ago in the bathroom sink because she had learned in her 6th month that the laundry room in the basement made her lightheaded. She wore a thin navy cardigan over the dress, buttoned at the top button only because the other buttons did not close over her belly anymore. Her hair was tied back with a black elastic band, and there were small silver studs in her ears that her mother had given her the day she left Enugu at 19 to come to the United States for university. In the pocket of her cardigan, she carried a small folded handkerchief that had belonged to her grandmother. The handkerchief was white with a small blue stitched border, and her grandmother had embroidered her initials, E.O., for Ezin Onyeka, into one corner in 1979 in the village of Nsukka in Enugu State. Her grandmother had given it to her the week before Blessing left for the United States, and had said, in Igbo, that a handkerchief was for the moments when you did not want anyone to see the tears. Blessing had not cried into it in 10 years. She carried it every day. It was folded into a square small enough to sit in the seam of her pocket, and she pressed her fingers against it sometimes without thinking. And she was pressing her fingers against it now while she stood on the sidewalk in the rain trying to decide which direction to walk. Her goal was simple. She needed to find somewhere out of the rain where she could sit down and call her cousin Chidinma, who lived 38 minutes away in Concord, and would come and get her if the call went through. Her phone had 6% battery. She had not thought to charge it that afternoon, because that afternoon she had been at Presbyterian Hospital for a prenatal check and had come home to find Gerald sitting at the kitchen table with a suitcase already packed by the door, and a woman she had never seen before sitting on the couch in the living room. That woman had not looked at her. She had looked at her phone. Gerald had said, "This is not working." Blessing had said, "I am 8 weeks from having a baby." Gerald had said, "Yes, that is part of what is not working." He had walked her 3 suitcases to the front door himself and put them outside on the sidewalk, one at a time, in silence. He had not raised his voice. He had not explained. He had done it the way a person handles a task that has been sitting on their list for too long and that they have decided to complete before they change their mind. When the 3rd suitcase was on the sidewalk, he had said, "I will send the rest of your things to Chidinma." That had been at 11:38. It was now 11:47. She had stood there for 9 minutes deciding what to do. The elastic band around her hair was already soaked. Her sandals were making a soft squelching sound each time she shifted her weight. Her belly felt tight the way it had felt for the last 2 weeks when she stood too long, and she knew the tightening was not labor, but she also knew that standing for another 20 minutes was not something she could do. She left 2 of the suitcases against the small brick pillar at the side of the walkway. She took the largest one in her right hand, and she began to walk down Oakdale in the direction of the streetlight that bent forward at the corner. The neighbor who watched her go was named Mrs. Patricia Coleman. She was 64 years old, and she was standing at her kitchen window with a mug of decaffeinated coffee at 11:49 p.m. When she saw the Nwosu Okoro house's porch light click off, and the young pregnant woman she had waved to 12 times over the past 2 years stepped down onto the sidewalk with a suitcase, Mrs. Coleman set the mug down on the counter. She stood at the window for about 40 seconds. She saw Blessing leave 2 suitcases against the brick pillar. She saw her walk out into the rain in the direction of the corner. She did not move from the window. She did not go outside. She did not open her door and call across the yard. She stood at her kitchen window with her hands flat on the counter, and she watched a 32-week pregnant woman walk down her street in the rain until Blessing turned the corner at Oakdale and was gone. Mrs. Coleman went back to bed at 12:04 a.m. She would not tell anyone what she had seen for 11 months. The security camera on the small blue house across the street from the Nwosu Okoro property captured Blessing on its footage at 11:51 p.m., walking past with the suitcase, one hand under her belly and the other on the handle of the case, the rain coming down straight in the frame of the camera. The camera belonged to a man who reviewed his footage every Sunday morning. He would see the footage, and he would not call anyone. He would delete it on Sunday afternoon. She walked 3 blocks. The suitcase wheel caught on a raised piece of sidewalk at the end of the 2nd block, and the case fell over into a small puddle. She stopped and set it upright. She did not sit down on it. She kept walking. At the corner of Beatty's Ford Road in Oakdale, she looked at her phone. It was at 4%. She tried to call Chidinma. The call did not connect. She tried again. It did not connect. She looked at the streetlight above her and she thought, very clearly, that if she called Chidinma from the middle of a rainstorm, on a corner where there was no cover, her phone would die before the call went through, and she would be standing on the corner in the rain with a suitcase and no phone. She put the phone back in her handbag. She began to walk down Oakdale in the other direction, looking at the houses. Most of them had their porch lights off. Some of them had cars in the driveway. She was looking for something specific, a light on inside the house, at a window that suggested someone was still awake. She walked past 4 houses. The 5th house was a small brick house set slightly back from the street, with a wooden porch and a light on in what looked like a front room. There was a wind chime on the porch that made a small sound in the wet air. There was a wooden bench on the porch with a cushion that had been left outside in the rain and was soaked through. The mailbox at the end of the walkway had a name on it, in white letters that had been repainted recently. The letters read, W.M. Thompson. Blessing stood at the end of the walkway for about 11 seconds. Then she walked up the walkway with the suitcase, and she walked up the 2 wooden steps onto the porch, and she stood in front of the door, and she did not knock right away. She stood there for another 30 seconds. She was pressing her fingers against the handkerchief in her pocket. The handle of the suitcase was cold in her right hand. Her hair was fully soaked now, and water was running down the back of her neck under the collar of her cardigan. At 12:07 a.m., she knocked on the door. If this story is landing on you the way I think it is, subscribe now. Because what Willa Mae Thompson does in the next 4 minutes changes the direction of everything. The door opened at 12:07 and 42 seconds. The woman who opened it was Willa Mae Thompson, 68 years old, wearing a long gray cardigan over a nightgown and a pair of thick wool socks on her feet. She had a mug of hot water with lemon in her right hand. She had been sitting in the front room reading a large print copy of a novel her sister had sent her from Atlanta 3 weeks ago, and she had not heard the knock the first time. She had heard the second knock, which had been softer than the first, and she had set the book down and walked to the door slowly, because she had a hip that did not move as fast as it used to. She opened the door. She saw a young pregnant woman standing on her porch in the rain, soaked through, holding the handle of a suitcase, with her right hand resting on her belly and her left hand in the pocket of a cardigan that was too thin for the weather. Willa Mae did not say anything for about 3 seconds. She looked at Blessing's face. She looked at the suitcase. She looked at the belly. She looked back at the face. Then she stepped to the side and she said, "Come in, baby," Blessing said. "I am sorry to disturb you. My phone is dying. I need to call my cousin." Willa Mae said, "Come in." Blessing said, "I do not want to bring the rain into your house." Willa Mae said, "Baby, come in." Blessing came in. Willa Mae closed the door behind her. She took the suitcase out of Blessing's hand and set it against the wall inside the door. She went into a small closet and came back with a large white towel. She wrapped the towel around Blessing's shoulders. She did it the way a person wraps a towel around a child. She did not ask questions. She said, "Sit on the bench there in the hallway. Do not move. I am going to bring you dry clothes and some tea. When you have been sitting for 5 minutes, I am going to run you a bath. When you are out of the bath, we are going to talk about who to call, but we are not going to do any of that in the order I just said, because first I am going to bring you the tea. Because when a person comes in from that kind of rain, the first thing they need is heat inside them, not heat outside them." Blessing sat on the bench. She did not cry until Willa Mae had left the hallway. Then she took the handkerchief out of her pocket and she pressed it against her eyes. And she cried very quietly for about 2 minutes. And then she folded the handkerchief again and put it back in her pocket, and by the time Willa Mae came back with a mug of ginger tea, Blessing was sitting with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight against the wall. Willa Mae looked at her. Willa Mae said, "Drink the tea, baby." Blessing drank the tea. She sat on the bench in Willa Mae's hallway for 8 minutes with the towel around her shoulders and the mug of ginger tea warming her hands, and Willa Mae did not ask her a single question during those 8 minutes. Willa Mae went into another room and came back with a soft flannel nightgown and a pair of thick socks, and set them on the bench beside Blessing without saying anything. Willa Mae went into the kitchen and put a small pot of soup on the stove that Blessing could smell from the hallway. A soup with ginger and thyme and something Blessing could not identify. Willa Mae came back and sat on the bench beside Blessing. Blessing said, "My name is Blessing." Willa Mae said, "I know, baby." Blessing looked at her. Willa Mae said, "I saw you at the bus stop on Beatty's Ford about a month ago. You were reading a book. I asked you what you were reading. You told me the title and you told me it was for a class you were teaching. You told me your name was Blessing. I did not tell you my name because you had to get on the bus. Blessing said, I remember. You had a bag with vegetables in it. You had bought them at the small market on the corner. Willa May said, that is where I do most of my shopping. They sat for a moment. Willa May said, the bathroom is down the hallway on the left. There is a bath already run. It is not too hot. I ran it while you were drinking the tea. When you are done, put on the nightgown and come to the kitchen. The soup will be ready by then. After you eat, we will call whoever you need to call, and you will sleep in the spare room, and tomorrow we will decide what tomorrow looks like. But right now, all you have to do is get into the bath. Do you understand me? Blessing said, yes, ma'am. Willa May said, call me Willa May. Blessing said, yes, Willa May. She went into the bathroom. There was a small white bath already 3/4 full of warm water. There was a bar of soap on the ledge and a large towel folded on a wooden stool beside the bath. On the wall above the sink in a small wooden frame was a black and white photograph of a young man in a graduation gown, standing in front of a brick building with the words Johnson C. Smith University, 1978, engraved on a small brass plate beneath the photograph. Blessing looked at the photograph for a moment before she got into the bath. She was in the bath for 11 minutes. When she came into the kitchen wearing the flannel nightgown and the thick socks, Willa May had set 2 bowls of soup on the small round table by the window and a plate of buttered bread and 2 glasses of water. Willa May said, sit, eat first, then talk. Blessing ate. When she was finished, Willa May said, now your cousin. What is her name? Blessing said, Chidinma. She lives in Concord. Willa May said, do you have her number? Blessing said, in my phone. My phone died. Willa May picked up her own phone from the counter and slid it across the table. She said, charge your phone on the counter there. Use mine to call her. Tell her you are safe. Tell her not to drive in this rain tonight. Tell her you will call her again in the morning. Then come and sit and drink another cup of tea with me, because I have not had company in this kitchen at midnight in 6 years, and I am not ready for you to go to bed yet. Blessing plugged her phone into the charger. She used Willa May's phone. Chidinma answered on the second ring. Blessing told her she was safe. She told her not to drive. She said she would call in the morning. Chidinma cried into the phone. Blessing did not cry. She said, I am safe, Chidinma, I promise. She hung up. She came back to the table. She sat down. Willa May poured her another cup of tea. Willa May said, Blessing, what happened tonight? Blessing told her. Willa May listened without interrupting. She did not shake her head. She did not exclaim. She sat with her hands folded around her mug, and she looked at Blessing while Blessing spoke. And when Blessing was finished, Willa May was quiet for about 6 seconds. Then Willa May said, Baby, what is your husband's full name? Blessing said, Gerald Nwosu Okoro. Willa May went very still. She set her mug down on the table. She said, Gerald Nwosu Okoro. Of Nwosu Okoro Property Group. Blessing said, yes, he works with his father. Willa May said, his father is Dr. Obinna Nwosu Okoro. Blessing said, yes. Willa May looked at her for a long moment. Then Willa May said, Baby, I need to make a phone call. It is very late and I am going to make it anyway. I am not going to explain what the phone call is about tonight, because you are 8 weeks from having a baby, and you have been standing in the rain, and you need to sleep. But I am going to tell you 2 things before you go to bed. The first thing is that you are safe in this house for as long as you need to be. The second thing is that tomorrow morning, before 9 o'clock, someone is going to come to this house, whose name I am going to tell you now, so that you do not startle when the doorbell rings. Her name is Constance Adeyemi. She is my daughter. She is a lawyer. She has been waiting for a phone call about the Nwosu Okoro family for 22 years. She is going to want to talk to you. But only when you are ready. Do you understand? Blessing said, I do not understand. Willa May said, you do not need to understand tonight. Tonight you need to sleep. Come with me. She took Blessing to the spare room. There was a single bed made up with clean white sheets and a folded blue quilt at the foot. There was a small bedside table with a glass of water and a lamp with a low bulb. Willa May turned back the quilt for her. She said, sleep, baby. I will be in the front room if you need anything. Blessing lay down. She did not think she would sleep. She slept in 11 minutes. She woke at 7:12 a.m. to the smell of eggs and toast and to the sound of two voices in the kitchen. She sat up slowly. The rain had stopped in the night. There was thin autumn sunlight coming in through the window of the spare room. She put on the cardigan Willa May had left folded on the chair for her, and she walked down the hallway to the kitchen. There were two women at the small round table. One was Willa May. The other was a woman in her mid-40s wearing a dark blue suit, with her hair braided back in a single long braid, and a pair of tortoiseshell glasses folded on the table in front of her beside a leather portfolio. When Blessing came into the kitchen, the woman in the blue suit stood up. She said, Blessing, my name is Constance Adeyemi. I am Willa May's daughter. I want to say something before I say anything else. I am so sorry for what happened to you last night. Please sit. Blessing sat. Willa May put a plate of eggs and toast in front of her and a glass of orange juice. Constance opened the leather portfolio. She took out several documents. She said, Blessing, I have to ask you a few questions, and then I have to tell you some things. If at any point you want me to stop, tell me, and I will stop. Is that okay? Blessing said, Yes, Constance said. How long have you been married to Gerald Nwosu Okoro? 4 years and 8 months. Where did you live when you were first married? A house on Oakdale that his family owns. We moved there right after the wedding. Is your name on the deed of that house? No. Is your name on the marriage certificate as Blessing Achebe or as Blessing Nwosu Okoro? As Blessing Achebe. I kept my name. My mother wanted me to keep my name. Constance made a small note on a piece of paper. She said, Blessing 22 years ago, a young woman named Amaka Nwosu married a man named Obinna Nwosu Okoro in a small ceremony in Lagos. 6 months into the marriage, she was 3 months pregnant. Obinna Nwosu Okoro told her he wanted a divorce. He put her out of the house they lived in on a Sunday night. She walked to my mother's cousin's house in Ikeja, 3 miles away, in a rainstorm, because she had nowhere else to go. She had a miscarriage 4 days later. She died the following year. She was 26 years old. Constance folded her hands on the table. Obinna Nwosu Okoro has done this to 3 women, Blessing, that we know of. He has done it to 3 young Nigerian women. And now his son has done it to you. My mother has been waiting 22 years for one of you to come to a door where someone would open it. Blessing sat with her fork in her hand. She said, I did not know. Constance said, you could not have known. But there is something you need to know now. In the state of North Carolina, if a marriage produces a pregnancy, the wife has significant protections regardless of whose name is on the deed of the marital residence. Gerald Nwosu Okoro cannot put you out of that house 8 weeks before the delivery of your child. What he did last night was not just cruel, Blessing. It was illegal. And I would like your permission to file the paperwork this morning that will make that clear to him and to his father. I have been building this case for 22 years. What I need is you. Blessing looked at Willa May. Willa May said, "It is your decision, baby." Blessing looked at the eggs on her plate. She looked at Constance. She looked at the leather portfolio. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and she pressed her fingers against the handkerchief her grandmother had given her in 1979. She said, "What do you need me to sign?" Blessing Adeze Ikebe was put out of a house on a Sunday night in a rainstorm at 11:38 p.m. by a husband who did not raise his voice. But the truth is, what he put her out of was a house that had been built on the ruin of 3 other women whose names his father had never spoken again, and what he put her out onto was a street that led 5 blocks and 1 right turn later to the door of a woman who had been waiting for a knock like hers for 22 years. He thought he was closing a chapter. He was, without knowing it, opening a case file that had been sitting in a leather portfolio on a lawyer's desk since 2003. You can close a door on a woman in the rain. You can turn off the porch light. You can change the locks while she is at a prenatal appointment and think that you have controlled the outcome of the story. But you cannot control which door she knocks on next. And you cannot control who has been waiting behind it. Some doors have been waiting a long time. Some women who open them have been carrying a folder for 22 years, and a name in their heart for longer than that. The world does not always give a wronged woman a door that opens. But when it does, when the street light bends slightly forward at exactly the right corner, and the mailbox has a name repainted in white letters, and the woman inside has been unable to sleep since 10 minutes past 10, the correction that begins on that porch does not end in that hallway. If your husband put you out in the rain at 8.5 months pregnant, and the next morning a lawyer sat at a stranger's kitchen table with a folder that had been waiting for you for 22 years, would you sign? Would you carry the weight of 3 women you had never met? Or would you let it go and let the next woman knock on the next door in the next rainstorm 10 years from now? Leave your answer in the comments. I really want to read it. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.